This is Dennis Palumbo, author of the award-winning Daniel Rinaldi Mysteries, and you're listening to the Dark and Stormy Book Club podcast.
Hello, and welcome to Dark and Stormy Book Club. It's December, and what we're reading.
Enjoy!
I'm Ann Dart.
I'm Tracy Stormy.
And I'm Kathy Knight.
And together we are
It Was a Dark and Stormy Book Club,
a podcast for mystery lovers.
Welcome.
If you enjoy our show, please consider contributing to the Dark and Stormy Patreon. By becoming a patron, you will help us create better and quality content. There are also benefits to becoming a patron, such as exclusive content and Dark and Stormy merchandise. Become a supporter at patreon.com/darkandstormybc. Check our website for the link. We appreciate any and all contributions. Thank you.
Hello. Welcome to Dark and Stormy Book Club. The gang's all here. We're very happy that Kathy has joined us. Misty's here. We're all together for the first time. Kathy's going to go first.
I picked out a Christmas cozy. Not only is it a Christmas cozy, it's a locked room Christmas cozy.
Ooh.
It is called The Case of the Ghost of Christmas Morning. It's written by P.J. Fitzsimmons, and I listened to it on audio, so it was narrated by Tim Bruce. It was published back in 2021 in paperback by what I assume is a small independent publishing firm called Indefensible Publishing.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then in May of this year, they did the audio on Blackstone Audio. This was a delightful romp through snowy Hertfordshire in England in the late 1920s at Christmas time. And it starts with, "Merry Christmas, Aunty dear. There's a dead body under the tree."
Is that really the first line?
That's the first line.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much.
I know, right? And so we are introduced to Azalea Boisjoly. That's Boisjoly like the wine region.
Okay.
Not Beaujolais like the wine region. Anthony Boisjoly, or Aunty if you're pressed for time, considers himself a problem solver, but his father would describe him as an effective spendthrift. Aunty visits his favorite Aunty at Christmas and is immediately drawn into the murder of Aunty's neighbor, Major Aaron Flaps Fleming, who is a popular local World War I flying ace hero.
Yeah, you got to pick one or the other. It's either WW1 or World War I.
I wrote WW1, but meant to say World War I.
You're saying is Aunty visited Aunty.
That's what I'm saying.
Is that what you said?
That's what I'm saying.
All right. Okay.
Major Flaps Fleming was a popular World War I flying ace hero. Aunty, or Aunty, we'll try to say it differently to distinguish. Aunty had trudged through the early morning snow to visit Flaps to find him under the tree with a knife in his back. When Constable Kimball is called in to investigate, the only footsteps in the snow are those of Aunty and those of Flaps. The problem is that Flaps seems to have visited the local village pub and bought a round of drinks for his neighbors on Christmas morning after having been found dead by Aunty.
Oh.
Okay. So
Interesting.
So with only Flaps and Auntie's footsteps as evidence, the inspector brought in from London, as the locals like to disparage him, immediately suspects Aunty, and Aunty must solve the puzzle of the ghost of Christmas morning.
Oh boy.
Yeah. It was
So
fun
did-
listening to this.
The narrator was able to distinguish between the two in a way
Yeah,
that...
and he had an English accent.
Ah,
So Aunty was closer to what I just said, Aunty, and
Right.
Aunty was more distinguishable. But
Okay.
it still got a little confusing at times. So P.J. Fitzsimmons describes a cast of Quirky characters that include Vickers, the elderly valet who forgets to bring tea on the tea tray. Ivor Wodehousian, he's the Scotland Yard detective inspector who's set up as Anty's foil. Smith, who dreams of entrepreneurial success with schemes like bringing the yo-yo industry to England. Paget the vicar, who writes horrible Christmas carols. Soaky Mike, the sulky cow pub owner, who would drink up all the profits if not put on a strict schedule by his daughter Sally. And the pride of the village of Gray's Hill, Hildy, the midget cow whose claim to fame is standing at most 4 feet tall.
Okay, so I'm already in love. Tell me, so as far as historical fiction, because sometimes you get somebody who wants to tell you all the things, and sometimes you get someone who flavors it just perfectly. Miss Fisher was one of the things that I really liked visually, because they definitely hit all the points, but you didn't feel like, and then you need to learn what happened in 1918 on January 6th, and then you need to know what happened on April 14th and 1927. So do you feel like they were able to incorporate the historical without overboarding it?
Very easily. Like I said, this was post-World War I,
Okay.
pre-World War II. So in between those two major historical events, I guess there wasn't as much to distinguish that time period, except that you had photographs at that
Yeah.
time, you had cars, you had trains. So
Yeah.
it was, I guess, the beginning of the industrial age, or right in there. So, you
Okay.
know, those things are sprinkled throughout, but he does ride in a sleigh with
Ooh.
Trevor Barking, who's the blacksmith. He has this sleigh and he ho-ho-hos to the horses. Ho-ho-ho. And
Does he? Does he ho 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 to the horses?
and the horses understand his different ho-ho-hos, so that's fun.
That's beautiful.
No, you are not hit over the head with the history, of course,
Okay.
because Flaps is a World War I flying ace. There is some talk of his wartime heroics, but no, not too much, no.
That's awesome. Well, and
It's
I
backdrop.
I see, and that's awesome, because so often setting is a character, and I do love to see setting as a character. I just lose interest if you're going to explain every blade of grass and why it's still there. And so sometimes you get bogged down as an author. It's really hard to research something for like 6 months and use about 42 minutes of your research. And I know that. But I really do love the historicals that give you the flavor. I have picked it up for a reason. I don't necessarily want to know every single thing and what was being invented outside of where I am, I guess, is the parameters that I work within.
This author, Fitzsimmons, he is a wordsmith for sure.
Oh,
And he is able to convey description in very succinct, creative ways. For instance, there's a Mrs. Boodle, and she is described.
I love these names
I
so
know.
much. I want the cow.
Is this a cozy?
It's a cozy for sure.
Okay.
Is it a series?
It is a series.
Huh.
Mrs. Boodle is described as a letter opener shaped woman.
Oh,
I mean, that tells
Hey,
you can
immediately.
picture, yes. And she has slipped through the crack in the door.
oh,
So he's very creative in
Yeah.
using his words. Most of the chapter titles were ingeniously invented alliteration,
ooh, look at you go.
or there were some clever rhymes in the titles. So I just so enjoyed his use of words.
That's
Um,
awesome.
Yeah, from the first page to the last, this book is filled with witty, sometimes absurd fun. And I found myself laughing out loud throughout this entire whimsical tale of
Sounds
wonder.
like a winner.
Oh,
Excellent.
definitely. I have to say, even though having said all that, it is a little bit over the top. So I
A
don't
little,
Just
think
the
a
names
little
alone.
rigorous. Good
I
job.
don't I mean, if you want to sit down and have some fun, definitely read this book.
Right.
But I don't know if I could read one right after the other.
Oh, Yes, I've run up against authors like that where I'm like, that was hysterical. But then I'd start the second one and I'm like, still hysterical, not getting as many laughs out of me. But then
Right.
if I wait 6 months and I go read that book again, it is hysterical again. It's just like an inundation sometimes.
It's
a
funny.
palate cleanser.
And isn't this the time of year for that, though?
Yeah.
Don't you need something light and fun?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I picked it out for that reason. This is the second in the Anty Boisjoly mystery series,
Okay.
which are locked room, cozy mysteries, and the narrow literary needs of those who feel that Ruth Rendell isn't frivolous enough and that Blanding's castle could stand a few more baffling murders. That's a quote, by the way.
I love it. I love
Very
it.
good.
This mystery is a head scratcher if you, like Aunty, believe that Aunty is not lying.
Oh,
Ooh.
intriguing. I like it.
But the motives that Aunty first proposes for the locals, they're unlikely and
Okay.
kind of frivolous. So when we did get to the resolution of the mystery, and Aunty does figure it all out, it is a surprise, but it's surprisingly credible as well.
Those are my favorites. I struggle sometimes with the ones where, especially in a cozy mystery, you have to introduce who did it somewhere in the beginning of the book. Don't smack me with somebody at the end and I'm like, well, who's that? And where were you the whole time?
And this,
You know?
no, it's someone shows up throughout the narrative.
That's awesome. That is awesome. I always
That's
love
when
a
I
good one.
throw up my hands and say, oh,
Yeah. Oh, if only I had paid more attention, I could have figured it out too.
Yeah, I mean, if I took notes of every single clue, maybe I could have put it together, but I just enjoy listening to it and then going back and saying, okay, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as an author, I always look at cozy mysteries as a game between you and me.
Mm-hmm.
And I should win often, because if I don't, you're not going to read me anymore, because you're going to be like, oh yeah, it's page 10. I already know who did it. But I do like to read the books where if I had paid more attention, if I had caught that thing on page 75 or whatever, that I don't feel snowed. I guess that's the biggest one. I do not want to get to the end and think, yeah, I don't.
that character you mentioned on page 40 that was only walking through the town.
Right?
Yeah, and he's the murderer.
Right, the guy with the brown hat, and you're like, and he's got a black one on this time, but they're like, who's the guy with the brown hat? I did introduce him on page 40, and you're like, yeah, no, sorry, he totally cheated. Totally cheated. Sorry about that.
Is it hard as a writer, Misty, to come up with different scenarios that can surprise you? And is there a trick to it? Is there?
You know, I mean, I think, at least for myself, one of the things that I do is I start with who could have done it. And I try to have at least 4 or 5 people that definitely can be my red herrings. But then you kind of have to circle around them and you have to make each of them make sense to some extent until it's disproved. That can be tricky, though. I have caught myself in a web of, well, that doesn't work. What are you doing? Like, that's not it at all. I do find that if you have a strong motivation that is more of something that happened a while ago that just now resurfaced, tends to work best, because the other part of the murder mystery is why now? Because you know, if this is somebody that they've known each other for the past 40 years and they've gotten along and she likes his fruitcake and he wants more of her, you know, meatballs, then why this second? What happened that made that come out as some kind of rage or high emotion that would make them kill someone? That has to make sense. And so I do find that if it's something like in the Wayback Machine or revenge or love, you know, there's really like 3 reasons in cozy mysteries why people kill: revenge, love, and greed. And so if you can put it, if you can use all 3, good for you. But if you at least pick one and made sure that the person who got killed is either killed because of who they are or killed because of what they stand for, those tend to work. Then you just have to start putting the things in there and hiding that lethal lipstick in the midst of another group of things that fell out of her purse.
Yeah.
You don't recognize the lipstick because it's the third out of 6 things that are mentioned. But then at the end, when you see the lipstick, you're like, oh, she dropped that on page 94. Oh, I see what you did there, you know. So
Yeah, it's like an aha moment.
Yeah.
Kathy, do you feel that locked room mysteries are not something that could be written today?
Locked room mysteries are written today. This
No,
was
no, no,
written
no,
today.
no. I mean, take place today.
in the current times, like as a
Yeah.
contemporary,
There's too many ways to get out of a room now. Because
but
no
that's-
lock can keep somebody. Well, I guess there's deadbolts. I didn't think about that.
there are locked, and there are modern day locked room mysteries. So,
Mhm.
Yes, there
so
are.
yes, my answer is yes.
I
Huh.
love it. I love it. And that always teases your imagination so much more, because you're starting out from a place of how on earth did someone do that? Whereas with just a non-locked room cozy mystery, you're like, okay, now who did it? As opposed to how did you do it and who did it?
Right,
And
that's
not
the
how.
extra puzzle.
Yes, because like in a thriller, sometimes it's a how done it, but it's more of a how done it that's gorier. Whereas with the cozy mysteries, it's a how done it. Like, how did you get in there? You left no marks. Nobody saw you. How did you manage to get out without being seen? So you're right.
That's
That's an
got to
extra
be,
level.
as a writer, the biggest challenge, and come up with something new that nobody else has ever thought of.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's, I think, the big challenge.
Do
I
it.
would start with the murder and work backwards.
I
Yeah.
think there's writers that do that.
I usually start with who's dead. And then I'm like, well, why are they dead? Who would have killed them? And then that's where the red herring come from. And then who did kill them? And then I have to start hiding that and make it make sense at the end, but not have them be a red herring in the middle. Although
See-
I have had them be a red herring, kind of, just to prove.
Yeah, I can't do all that. This is way beyond me. I can do math. You do this.
Physics. You know, in case you're newish to the podcast, we're going to say that she does theoretical physics, but feels
yeah.
that perhaps a locked room mystery would be a little out of her pay grade. And I think that there's a no on that one, but that's okay. We'll leave it right there.
So wrapping up on this, I just want to say that this was a thoroughly enjoyable book. It was a welcome, lighthearted, and fun reading during these fraught times, and I highly recommend it. I enjoyed the narrator. Tim Bruce brings Aunty and the rest of the cast of characters to life with his skillful narration. And I tried to find out more about PJ Fitzsimmons. He seems to be a mystery himself.
Ooh.
He describes himself as a freelance ghost, and I'm
Okay.
assuming that means ghostwriter
Probably.
for mainstream genres, but when
Okay.
writing under his own name, he strictly writes for the laughs,
Huh.
which he accomplished. He
Interesting.
dreams of an alternative reality in which P.G. Wodehouse wrote locked room mysteries, and in which he is P.G. Wodehouse.
I mean, go big.
So, you know, his name is P.J. Fitzsimmons. His hero is P.G. Wodehouse. I'm kind of thinking it might be a pseudonym.
It sounds like it.
Yeah. So I was unable to find a personal website or social media presence for PJ, but he does have a presence on Goodreads and on Fantastic Fiction. The series is published by what seems to be a small independent publishing house called Indefensible Publishing, and its website, indefensiblepublishing.com, is where you wind up if you click on PJ Fitzsimmons's website link on Goodreads. Be the mastermind behind Indefensible Publishing.
So it might be self-published, and that's what he calls the house.
Yeah, well, this is what I could find out in my
Interesting.
investigative skills.
Look at you, investigation. See, not just theoretics.
Didn't go too far.
Just that's okay. That's okay. The A plus for effort.
Thank
Three
you
gold.
so much.
I'll send them your way.
Oh, yay. No, 5 golden rings.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
worth the
well,
time.
yeah. I don't want the 4 calling birds, as we talked about earlier. Yeah, when we started, before we started recording, everyone, I was telling stories about a bird that my great aunt owns, that I want to say it might be an Amazon, the one of the green ones that talks, and his name is Choppy. And he, 42 years later, still asks my cousin if her homework is done every time he sees her. So he also likes to sing opera while you're eating, so, very loudly, and the same song over and over again. So there you go.
I have friend of the show, Bonnie MacBird's novella, What Child Is This? It's the 5th in her Sherlock Holmes pastiche. It is published by Collins Crime Club, which is an imprint of HarperCollins, and it's only 225 pages long, but it's an excellent, excellent book. It's Christmas, 1890 in London, and Sherlock Holmes hates Christmas.
Of course he does.
He just thinks that's the biggest waste of time imaginable. Well, Dr. Watson comes to visit him because his wife is off visiting relatives or something. He comes to stay with Sherlock, and he tries to get him out to see the Christmas lights and listen to the music, and Sherlock Holmes wants nothing to do. Sherlock is creating some chemical experiment, and the whole apartment gets choked with some kind of noxious smell. So they have to go out to get some fresh air. So they're walking down the street and they come upon the scene of a kidnapping. A small child was grabbed and a man takes off running with the child. Dr. Watson goes to help the 2 women, and Sherlock Holmes takes off after the kidnapper. This begins a short but very well-written story that brings to light the plight of Victorian women who gave birth to children out of wedlock.
Oh.
The most prevalent form of contraception was abortion back then.
Ooh.
But working class Victorian women who found themselves unable to care for a child, or they're going to be put out because they have to go to the workhouse, they can't take a baby with them. Across London, they started up little independent businesses. They were called baby farms. And if you were going to work, say 6 o'clock in the morning, you took your infant, you dropped him off to this baby farm, and you went on your work. And they charge just like a babysitter today.
Okay.
A lot of times they were just squalid, big rooms with a big table, and they just toss the babies in there. If your baby even lived through the day, you considered yourself lucky. But they supposedly were advertised that they would breastfeed babies that needed
Interesting.
breastfeeding, and they would feed the children and keep them clean. And what they did was just toss them in the middle of a room and just let them lay there. Poor women back then were to be given food, money, and a place to stay, but they had to go to the workhouse, and they could not take their baby. It was just a horrible, horrible situation. And that centers around the story that involves the kidnapping. There are some really good characters. Do you remember the character Hetty that was in one of her previous books, the young girl
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, she plays a major part in this story. She's grown up and she just has Sherlock Holmes wrapped around her little finger. There's also another character that is sort of a nemesis of Sherlock Holmes. He's a very flashy detective and he's trying to shove Sherlock Holmes out of the way and take all the glory for himself. It's written with a lot of humor, but a lot of pathos, and I enjoyed it. And Bonnie MacBird, she's been on the show. Her website is macbird.com.
So with it being a shorter novella, did you feel like she had enough time to explore the social issues of that? Was that a bigger part of the book, or was it more focused down on the kidnapping of this particular child?
It was a separate thing, but when the whole story wrapped up, it all came together as
Oh.
part of this original kidnapping of the child, and it all had to do with the situation at the baby farm. It's funny, Sherlock Holmes is walking down the street, a woman comes up. He's keeping an eye on the baby farm to see what goes on there when a woman runs up and throws a baby into his arms and runs off. So Sherlock Holmes is standing there with the baby. What?
That's probably worse than Christmas as far as
Yes.
Christmas is bad. Little tiny people in diapers who need you is like
Worse.
worse. I love it. Now, and this is part of a series for her as a novella. Are they all novellas?
No,
or
no.
Oh,
an
no.
offshoot?
She is one of the authors authorized by the Conan Doyle Foundation, and she is also a member of the Baker Street Irregulars. She's the real deal.
She lives on Baker Street.
Oh,
Right
okay.
off Baker Street.
Love it. That's
Do you know the movie Tron?
yes.
She wrote that.
Oh wow, that's cool.
Uh,
That's a big one over
She
here in
is
my house.
a delight. When we interviewed her, it was on video.
Uh-huh.
She has a collection of Sherlock Holmes memorabilia like you would not believe. She
Wow.
has the chair that was in the television series. She's just really something.
That is very, very cool.
her books are always very good, and I knew I was going to like this before I even opened it.
Well, I'm glad you were not disappointed.
I was not. I wish it was
Excellent.
a little longer.
Mhm.
There were
It's just a
things-
little teaser.
I know. Trivia. Last week's question was, which mystery author began his journalism career with an assignment to cover the Democratic Convention in 1984? A. Daniel Silva, B. Walter Mosley, C. Donald Westlake, or D. Joseph Thorne? The answer is A. Daniel Silva. Silva began his working career as a journalist with a temporary position at the United Press in 1984. His assignment was to cover the Democratic National Convention. UPI made Silva's position permanent and a year later transferred him to the Washington, D.C. headquarters. After 2 more years, he was appointed as UPI's Middle East correspondent and moved to Cairo. This week's question is, which author worked for a publisher, left to become a systems analyst, and then returned to writing? A. Anne Perry, B. Dan Brown, C. Reese Bowen, or D. Lincoln Child? Tune in next week for the answer. Because of having all 4 of us together, this episode ran a little long, so we are going to cut it off halfway Tune in next week and we will play the second half for you. We thank you for listening and we look forward to seeing you next week. Bye.